Last month, Governor John Bel Edwards vetoed the Stop Harming Our Kids Act, a bill that will prevent minors from receiving medical treatment to alter their gender by surgery or puberty blockers, among other things. On Tuesday, Louisiana lawmakers successfully overturned Edwards' veto in a special session, their second successful effort to overturn the governor's dismissals. Following the session, the governor issued a statement calling the bill unconstitutional. Erwin, the president and CEO of Council for Better Louisiana, is here to talk about that special session. So, for the second time in Governor John Bel Edwards' tenure, lawmakers have successfully overturned the veto, like I said earlier. So this time they voted to override his dismissal of the Protect Our Children Act. For those that may not know what the act was, can you explain briefly?
Yeah, basically it would prohibit gender-affirming care for minors, even with parental consent. I mean, right now a minor to receive that would have to have parental consent anyway. This basically said for some of those things, and as you mentioned, surgery, which is really not much of an option because that's not really utilized here, but for other things like hormone therapy, puberty blockers and things like that, it actually prohibits it even with parental permission to do that. And so it's one of the things that you've seen happen in other states, and now that's passed here, and obviously with the veto override, that's going to become law.
Now, this was one of the more controversial bills that happened during session. I mean, why was there so much support around this bill to where there was an override veto session?
Well, I think this one really caught the attention of folks on both sides of the issue. For those who were pushing it and really kind of supporting this effort, they really did see it as an effort to protect children, and that's why you have the name of the bill, about Not Harming Children Act. On the other side, you had people who were coming from the trans community who came out in very good numbers to the Capitol to talk about their own personal experiences. It was very emotional in a lot of times. There were other pieces of legislation kind of dealing with gender issues there. So this one was the one though that really kind of caught people's attention on both sides and really was the driving force behind this session.
Well, for this special session, it ended and began pretty quickly. I mean, it started on Tuesday and ended on Tuesday. Is it normal for a session to go that quickly?
Well, it's kind of the new normal sort of for us. We've had the right or the ability to have these veto sessions ever since our Constitution was ratified in 1974. We've had about 3 of them, in the last 3 years. So we don't have a lot of experience with them. But I think the idea is not to go, belabor this. They kind of knew that piece of legislation, number one, was top on the agenda. There were other pieces that were up for consideration, but I don't think they wanted to belabor the point. They've debated these bills. They voted on them in the past. They wanted to get in there and get out.
Well, that kind of brings me to my next question. I mean, this was obviously one of the more controversial bills, like I said earlier, but there were other vetoes. Can you tell me a little bit about what those other vetoes were and if they popped up in this session at all?
There were 3 total that the House actually did override. There was a vaccine bill, another one dealt with foreign nationals purchasing property in Louisiana. There were votes, like I say, on a number of those in the House, but at the end of the day, the Senate only went along with that one.
I mean, that final vote on the budget had huge cuts to the Department of Health, and there was some talk that this was going to pop up in the special session too. Did it? What ultimately happened?
It sort of did, but basically didn't. There was the option for it too, and a couple of the bills that dealt with some of those were actually sort of on the agenda. But at the end of the day, what happened at the end of the regular session and the pieces that the governor put together to kind of rectify that or to kind of mitigate what would happen were very complicated. And so while there was some desire among some particularly conservative legislators to try and kind of go back on that, it was really a difficult thing to do. And at the end of the day, they just kind of punted on that one.
Yeah, they just kind of let that
one slide.
It would have been a lot to rework. Well, what about the next steps for the bill that was actually overturned? Is that automatically going to become law? Will it face any other challenges?
Yeah, it does become law. So that is now law in Louisiana, basically. But what you've seen in other states where this has happened, and it's been in a number of states, is that there's litigation pretty soon after the passage of the legislation. So I think we can pretty well rest assured that in some way that it's going to be litigated, that there will be a challenge in court to this legislation.
All right, Barry. Well, it's really nice to have you. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks so much.